They thought he would never find out. That a man obsessed with order and structure couldn't possibly have the instincts of a predator, one who can smell a lie, catch it in a glance, feel it in an awkward pause. They forgot who Scott Norwood is, a soldier, a strategist, a husband who misses nothing. When the toilet seat is raised differently than he left it, it's not just a detail, it's the beginning of the end. Behind the facade of a perfect marriage lies a barbed web of betrayal. Behind his wife's gentle smile, an old ghost from the past, and behind her mother, complicity dressed up as concern. One forgotten flash drive, one whiff of unfamiliar cologne, one careless word spoken over the phone, and the life he built brick by brick begins to crumble. But Scott doesn't break. He's not a man of impulsive revenge. He dismantles with precision. Greetings, my friend. Before you watch, I have a favor to ask. Support my buddy by subscribing to his channel via the link in the description. He'll be thankful. Let's begin. Scott Norwood had long built his world on the foundation of order. A former military officer turned meticulous security consultant, he established Norwood Security Consultants with an unwavering focus on precision and dependability. Whether in his professional duties or personal life, Scott approached everything with the same unwavering discipline. He held himself, and those in his orbit, to stringent expectations. That relentless uniformity earned him the respect of peers and clients alike, and made him particularly attuned to the slightest deviations in his environment. Before launching his firm, Scott had completed a decade in the armed services. There, he developed sharp critical thinking skills and an unshakable commitment to structure. The military shaped his core identity, leaving behind habits and values he carried into civilian life. Once he transitioned, he brought with him an eye for flaws others overlooked and an uncompromising drive for excellence, qualities that would later become his greatest assets. One uneventful Tuesday afternoon, Scott returned to the office after grabbing lunch, ready to expand on a few strategic insights he'd brainstormed during the break. He stepped out to hand off some handwritten notes to his assistant, Lena, asking her to transcribe them. Though she was mid-conversation on the phone, she acknowledged the request with a nod and assured him they'd be ready in half an hour. As an aside, she casually mentioned she'd been speaking with Danica, Scott's wife, and their daughter, a typical midday catch-up that had become routine. Danica worked limited hours at the local library, often having spare time in the afternoons. Scott never questioned Lena's ability to multitask. Her personal calls didn't seem to affect her efficiency. Returning to his office, Scott began organizing his agenda for the rest of the day. Earlier that morning, he'd reviewed project updates, most of which showed stable progress. However, 2 employees stood out for the wrong reasons. Their performance had slipped, marred by a lack of organization and a defensive attitude toward feedback. What irked Scott most wasn't their shortcomings, but their evasiveness. Had they simply admitted their challenges, he would have reassigned them without hesitation. Instead, their dishonesty grated on him far more than any failure to meet benchmarks. After handling a few client emails, Scott turned his focus to a major assignment, designing a security overhaul for a historical hospital downtown. The building dated back to the 1930s and hadn't had a security update since the 1970s. Scott had mapped out some preliminary ideas at home and stored them on a USB stick. Reaching for it now, he realized it wasn't there. After a brief pause, he recalled where he'd left it, on the dresser in his bedroom. Irritated, he shrugged on his coat and headed for the door to retrieve it. As he passed Lena's desk, he mentioned the quick trip home. She barely responded, preoccupied with her phone call. Just outside the office, Scott stopped short. He'd forgotten his car keys. As he turned back to grab them, he overheard Lena's voice take on a rushed, almost panicked tone. She told someone to hurry. When she noticed him, she gave a startled smile and joked about his forgetfulness. The moment passed, but Scott quietly filed away her reaction. During the drive, Scott couldn't shake the urgency in Lena's voice. She'd referred to a man, but hadn't said who. Arriving home, he found Danica looking slightly flustered. She explained she'd been sorting laundry, her cheeks flushed and her manner a bit offbeat. Scott took note but said nothing. Upstairs, the flash drive was right where he'd expected, sitting on the dresser. The bed was messy, and the hamper was only half full, indications that Danica's story about laundry held some truth. Still, something felt off. The toilet seat was up. Danica had long been vocal about her irritation over Scott leaving the seat raised. Without a word, he closed the lid, the small inconsistency nagging at him. On his way out, he kissed Danica on the cheek. "Sorry about the seat," he said with a grin. She paused before replying with a teasing remark. "Good thing I didn't notice." Her offhand comment stayed with him as he pulled out of the driveway. Once in the garage, Scott detected an odd, unfamiliar scent. He wandered toward the workbench, wondering if something had spilled or leaked, but everything appeared to be in place. Unable to place the smell, he dismissed it and drove back to the office. When he returned, Lena gave him a glance that lingered just a second too long but kept her thoughts to herself. His email inbox had piled up during his short absence, so he got to work clearing the backlog. He deleted the usual clutter, but several messages demanded immediate attention, many of them related to the same two problem employees. Their poor habits were once again creating ripple effects through the team. Scott's frustration deepened, especially over the dishonesty they continued to display. Later, Lena handed him a note from Danica, a short grocery list, along with a reminder about that evening's HOA meeting. Scott groaned inwardly. He was in for 2 hours of neighbors bickering over landscaping and parking rules. After dinner, something simple Danica had made, he changed clothes and dragged himself to the meeting. It was every bit as tedious as expected, with no resolutions in sight. When he finally returned home, the tension of the day gave way to a peaceful evening with Danica, and they ended the night in quiet intimacy. The following day unfolded with fewer bumps. Scott made solid progress on the hospital project, though a call from a client outside the city pulled him away mid-afternoon. A recently installed security system was malfunctioning. Upon inspection, Scott discovered the cause immediately. A technician had neglected to plug in a single cable during setup. The mistake was infuriating in its simplicity, and Scott left the site irritated. Since Danica was scheduled for an afternoon shift at the library, Scott wasn't in a rush to get back. During the drive, the odd details from the previous day returned to his mind. The strange garage smell had faded, but it still bothered him. The inconsistencies around the house were small but persistent, and he could no longer shrug them off. Back home, he decided to finish folding the laundry Danica had started. The only items were the sheets from their bedroom, a single set. That alone gave him pause. Danica was thrifty with resources and rarely ran such a small load. After putting the sheets away, another detail tugged at his attention. The toilet seat was down. He clearly remembered leaving it raised that morning. Stranger still was the fact that Danica had made the bed early Tuesday, yet later stripped it to wash the linens, something she typically wouldn't do. These were minor irregularities, but together they formed a pattern Scott could no longer ignore. The inconsistencies gnawed at him. A man who prided himself on precision, Scott couldn't ignore even the smallest deviation. He tried brushing off the tension, but it stuck like a burr. Later that evening, a cold beer in hand, he drifted off on the couch. He didn't stir until Danica came through the door with a bag of Chinese takeout. They ate together, barely exchanging a word. He had intended to mention the oddities he'd noticed, but fatigue dulled his determination. After cleaning up the remnants of dinner, they curled up on the sofa before heading off to bed. Come morning, something was immediately wrong. A faint alarm rang inside him the moment he blinked awake. He kept quiet. Danica had a tendency to blow things out of proportion. Instead, he swallowed 2 aspirin and went through his usual motions. By the time he arrived at work, the ache in his head had eased slightly, but the low-grade tension about what he'd observed at home hadn't left. He took care of the easy items on his to-do list, purposefully avoiding anything related to the complex hospital contract. As the hours crept on, he felt his body give way, his skin flushed, his balance wavered. Lena stopped by frequently, each time looking more concerned. He shrugged off her comments, blaming a bad night's sleep. When lunchtime came, he chose plain noodle soup, but it didn't offer much relief. By the afternoon, even sitting up became a chore. He stepped into the hall to find Lena, but didn't make it far before she appeared, worry etched on her face. "Scott, you look awful," she said, her palm pressing to his forehead. "You're burning up. I'm taking you home." She glanced at the clock, then added, "Wait for me in reception. I'll grab my keys." Scott tried to insist he could drive, but she wouldn't hear of it. She called Travis to help get him downstairs. Travis supported him halfway down the corridor before turning back to lock Scott's office. Slumped against the wall, Scott caught the sound of Lena on the phone, her voice taut with urgency. "Danica, he's really sick. I'm bringing him back now. Don't fall apart. Just deal with it," she said, her tone sharp. Then came something harsher still. "Tell him to go. I don't care what his excuse is." "Too bad," she added coldly. The next thing Scott recalled was being guided into a strange car by Travis and Ralph, the security guard. Everything after that blurred into blackness. When he regained consciousness, Lena and Travis were helping him through his own front door. Danica stood there, looking pale and shaken. "We should take him to the emergency room," she said, her voice barely steady. "No," Lena said, firm and confident. "It's just the flu. He doesn't need a hospital, just rest. He's too weak for stairs, so we'll keep him down here." Scott vaguely remembered taking a warm drink from Lena's hands before she left, assuring him she'd return soon. Drifting in and out of sleep, a thought sliced through the fog. Gautier. That strange scent he'd picked up earlier. It was men's cologne. He muttered the name, though no one was around to hear. Hours later, still in a daze, he caught Danica's voice filtering from the kitchen. She spoke softly but with resolve. "Tristan, I can't do this anymore. Scott needs me. I won't sneak around with you again. It's over. Today was the last straw. You were just a fling, not some great romance. I'm not scared of your threats. Scott isn't the boy you used to torment. Push him, and you'll regret it." Paralyzed in bed, Scott soaked in every word, stunned. A few moments passed, and then Lena's voice chimed in, low but decisive. "Good riddance. That nonsense should have ended ages ago." "Mom, please," Danica cut in. "It's done. Scott doesn't know." "And it's going to stay that way," Lena replied. Their voices faded into silence. Scott let out a weak sound, just enough to bring them running. Danica knelt beside him, asking if they had disturbed him, but he played dumb, mumbling something about a sore throat. They seemed relieved and offered him something cold to drink. He sipped slowly, feeling the chill soothe his throat while his mind reeled from what he had overheard. He stayed quiet. For now. He wasn't ready to speak, didn't yet know how. Friday crawled by in nauseous waves. Most of it was spent hunched over the downstairs toilet, racked with vomiting and dry heaves. He hadn't kept anything down since yesterday, and the broth from lunch had come right back up. Around noon, Danica left for her library shift, and Lena returned to her own job, leaving him alone to face the worst of it. The solitude gave him time to think, not that he welcomed it. In the stillness between episodes, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Danica's secrecy, Tristan's involvement, Lena's complicity. The faint cologne, the raised toilet seat, the stripped sheets, all clues he hadn't recognized at first. Lena's conveniently timed calls had been subtle warnings. The whole truth had been staring him in the face. He just hadn't seen it until now. By late afternoon, the fever had broken. He managed a few careful sips of water. Slightly more stable, he shuffled back to the living room with a book, hoping it might settle his thoughts. Danica came home earlier than expected and seemed genuinely relieved to see him out of bed. She told him the doctor said it was a virus, and all he needed was fluids and rest. Antibiotics wouldn't help. Scott, still weak in body but now razor-sharp in mind, simply nodded. The evidence was no longer something Scott could deny. At last, he saw everything clearly, who had betrayed him and how it had all unfolded. Danica lingered nearby, gently encouraging him to head upstairs where he might feel more comfortable. But he refused. The bedroom had become contaminated in his mind. Just imagining Tristan intruding on that sacred space made his skin prickle with disgust. He insisted on staying on the couch in the living room, dismissing her concern with a vacant, "I'm fine." Later that night, he asked whether Lena would be dropping by the following day. Danica answered that her mother had other commitments, a planned hike and dinner with her boyfriend. Scott interrupted her quietly but firmly. She needed to change those plans. There would be no negotiation. Danica hesitated, uneasy, but gave in. Her voice shrank to a whisper as she dialed her mother. From where he lay on the couch, Scott picked up part of the call. "Mom, you need to come. I think he knows." He feigned sleep, his mind spiraling as he ran through everything again and again. As night descended, he continued turning down Danica's gentle requests for him to go to bed. Instead, he lay there and listened to her take another phone call from somewhere deeper in the house. Her voice broke the quiet like a whip. "No, you moron! Never again! I mean it! Screw you!" The call ended with a bang as the phone slammed down. By Saturday morning, a steaming shower helped Scott feel somewhat grounded, though the emotional weight still clung to him. Clean and calm, he stood in the doorway, watching Danica sleep. Something in him still responded to her, a familiar pull, but it was laced now with bitterness and profound disappointment. His mind circled back to Tristan, the same Tristan who'd made his high school years miserable, a face he'd long hoped never to see again. The fury surged inside him, but he kept it contained, locking it away beneath the surface. This wasn't the moment to erupt. Like someone planning a precise counterattack, Scott chose to wait. He changed into a pair of jeans and a soft shirt. Comfort now mattered more than appearance. He reviewed the post-surgery dietary guidelines his doctor had given him and settled on a light breakfast, toast with jelly and a cup of tea, skipping his usual coffee. The clock on the wall read 10:35 a.m. He left a note for Danica, back by noon, and walked out the door. It was time to face both her and Lena at once, without letting them spin the story. As he drove aimlessly, his mind churned. Like his career, life demanded responsibility. Everyone made mistakes, sure, but lying to bury them was unforgivable. Danica hadn't just broken their vows. She'd tried to erase the evidence, and Lena had helped her. Could he ever forgive them? Could trust be rebuilt? That question haunted him. But one thing was beyond doubt. He would uncover the full truth. At exactly noon, Scott pulled into the driveway, parking behind Lena's car. Inside, both women were seated at the kitchen table. Their conversation stopped the instant he walked through the door. Without a word, he poured himself a small cup of coffee and sat down across from them. "Thank you both for helping me this week," he said, his voice measured. Lena offered a tense smile, while Danica sat rigid, bracing for what was coming. "This is what I think happened," Scott said steadily. "Danica, I believe you slept with Tristan Blake, in our house, in our bed, on both Tuesday and Thursday. And Lena, I think you helped by keeping watch. If I'm wrong, tell me now." Danica's face went ghostly pale. Lena's hand jerked, spilling her coffee onto the floor. As they rushed to mop up the mess, Scott stayed quiet. When they returned to the table, Danica began to speak, but he raised a hand to stop her. "I'm talking," he said, his tone firm. "Tuesday morning, you made the bed. You never do that before stripping the sheets. That afternoon when I came home, the garage smelled like a man's cologne, not mine. You also did laundry, but only the sheets were in the dryer, no clothes. Why would that be? Were you trying to erase the traces? He didn't wait for a reply. Lena, I heard you that morning, warning Danica to hurry up, telling her I was almost home. Then again on Thursday. You told her to get him out before I walked in. Danica started shaking her head, her voice trembling. No, Scott, you've misunderstood. I didn't cheat. There's more to this. Don't, he snapped. No more lies. If there's any hope for us, I need honesty. Did you sleep with him? And if so, did you use protection? Tears welled in Danica's eyes, but she said nothing. Lena was openly sobbing now. Scott fixed his gaze on Danica, reading the tight, unreadable expression on her face, the same mask he'd seen on employees who were seconds away from confessing a lie. At last, Danica spoke. Tristan was my boyfriend in high school, she began. We were off and on throughout college. He was toxic, I knew that, but I couldn't stay away. She hesitated, struggling to go on. After we graduated, I ended it. He got married, had a family. I thought I was done with him. But then, a few months ago, he reached out. We started talking, just reminiscing. It wasn't meant to go beyond that. Scott's response was ice. But it did. Danica's voice cracked. Yes, she said quietly. It did. I don't even know why. I was blind. Everything unraveled months ago. I ended it, Scott. I swear I did. Scott leaned back, his expression unreadable, though his silence pulsed with suppressed anger. His voice was calm, but each word was laced with tension. You didn't stop it, Lena. The situation ended it for you. And you let that happen. You lied to me. Both of you did. Lena tried to speak, but Scott cut her off with a raised hand. Don't. I'm not interested in hearing your reasons. He stood, pushing the chair back with careful control, the scraping sound loud in the heavy silence. We're not finished, but I'll decide when this conversation continues. With that, he walked away, leaving the room steeped in stunned quiet. Inside, he already knew this wasn't about salvaging what was lost. It was about determining whether trust this broken could ever be pieced back together. Over 6 years ago, Danica had come back into Scott's life, and he'd been taken aback by how much she'd evolved. Time had sharpened her poise and confidence, and with it, reawakened the love he thought he'd long buried. When she accepted his proposal, it felt like a dream realized. He had meant every promise he made in their vows. A few months earlier, as her high school reunion approached, Danica had asked him to come with her, but Scott brushed it off, dismissing such gatherings as shallow, filled with fake smiles and empty small talk, just like the ones he'd endured in the past. Danica had felt wounded by his refusal. She believed that if he truly cared about her feelings, he would have gone. Looking back, she realized her hurt might have been impulsive, but it had been honest. That evening, surrounded by the faces of her youth, Danica had basked in the warmth of familiarity. Unlike Scott, who had never felt he fit in during those years, Danica had been admired, popular, and held on to fond memories of that time. Tristan had been there too, an old flame, alone, no ring, no spouse. Danica's ring was visible, but it didn't seem to faze him. At first, his flirting was something she dismissed with a laugh. But his persistence in the following weeks chipped away at her resistance. Eventually, she gave in. First to a casual lunch, then to drinks at a nearby bar. She knew it was dangerous, yet she kept the truth from Scott. That night, Tristan made a move. She insisted that nothing truly intimate occurred, just a brief, regrettable closeness. Still, she admitted how willingly she let herself get swept up in the excitement. At the time, she convinced herself it didn't count as real betrayal. Once home, she avoided Scott, believing she could bury it all under silence. Her guilt was numbed by the certainty that Scott would never suspect her. His faith in her was unwavering. But Danica confessed that it hadn't stopped there. Tristan continued to reach out, and she continued to answer. Each encounter deepened her shame, but she couldn't resist the rush, the secrecy, the risk, the illusion of escape. Eventually, she told her mother, Lena, and begged her to help keep the secret. Lena, torn between loyalty to her daughter and affection for Scott, reluctantly agreed to cover for her. She justified it by saying she feared Scott's reaction if he ever found out, worried it might destroy everyone. Her reasoning was simple. She only wanted to protect what they had. But the deception gnawed at her, day after day. Danica ultimately broke it off with Tristan. The final straw came when he asked her to sneak away to a motel, while Scott, sick at home, lay alone. That moment shattered any illusion she had left. She ended it and confessed her wrongdoing, blaming her actions on her unresolved past with Tristan. She claimed her love for Scott had never faded and promised to make amends, through therapy, reconciliation, whatever it took. Lena, too, pleaded for Scott's forgiveness. She said her silence was born from an impossible situation, caught between her daughter and a man she considered family. Now both women turned to Scott, waiting for a response, while he wrestled with the sting of betrayal. Lena's complicity felt like a knife to the back. Danica's excuses sounded hollow, unconvincing. Scott was left wondering if anything could be salvaged. Everything was crumbling. A heavy stillness took root in Scott's chest as the reality set in. He couldn't pretend any longer. His voice came out low and steady, stripped of affection. Danica, you cheated on me, and you lied about it. I know it began the night of the reunion. It's been going on for 3 months. You've been seeing Tristan the whole time, and you're still trying to spin it like it wasn't deliberate. You don't maintain a relationship like that unless you're invested in it. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. I see it for what it is. And your mother? She betrayed me just as much, stood by and let it happen, helped you keep it hidden. I was deceived by both of you. Danica couldn't look him in the eye. Her hands covered her face, her body curling in on itself. Lena stayed composed, though her voice quivered as she spoke. What will you do now, Scott? Please don't make any hasty choices. Give yourself time. Scott's answer was firm, final. I won't act recklessly, but I also won't let this linger. The betrayal itself cut deep, but what truly shattered everything was the continuous stream of deception that followed. Any remnants of trust I might have held for either of you have vanished completely. I'm getting in touch with a divorce attorney next week. Since I can't conclusively prove an affair, I'll pursue another legal basis for the filing. But Danica, if you decide to fight this, I won't stay quiet. I'll go public with Tristan's involvement. I'll sue him for alienation of affection. I'll bring in private investigators to question the neighbors, gather accounts of his visits, and inspect his work logs to see if he ever came here on company time. If you don't push back, I'm willing to file for a no-fault divorce and offer reasonable alimony. You were a devoted partner for 6 years. I won't take that away from you. You have 30 days to find another place. I assume you'll be moving in with Lena. Lena gave a hesitant nod. Yeah, I will. Scott, please think this over, she said gently. You and Danica built something real over the years. Yes, she made a serious mistake, but she's remorseful. She's not the same person anymore. She won't do it again, Danica whispered, her voice barely audible. Scott's expression hardened. That's not the issue. It's not just the cheating. It's the lies you told afterward. I gave you a chance to come clean, and you still chose to hide it. I can't ever trust you again. That settled it. The decision had been made. The unraveling had begun. That night, Scott packed his belongings and moved into the upstairs guest room. By Monday, he was at a clinic getting tested for STDs. He couldn't ignore the possibility of exposure through Tristan. He urged Danica to get checked too, though he doubted she would follow through. Whatever Danica chose from this point on wasn't Scott's concern. His tests came back clean, though he still had to return for HIV confirmation in a few months. Morally, Scott felt compelled to let someone else know what had happened. Later that day, he picked up the phone and called Celeste, Tristan's wife. She was cautious on the call, especially since Scott wasn't ready to explain why he was reaching out. Still, she agreed to meet him at a nearby IHOP just off the highway, warning him she only had about an hour before daycare pickup. When Celeste arrived, Scott immediately noticed the contrast between her and Danica. She had an intense beauty, pale skin and sharp Irish features, with jet-black hair that framed a face marked by strength and sorrow. There was a toughness in her demeanor that Danica never possessed. Then she said something that took him by surprise. "You were at home when I called," Scott said plainly. "So if you're not working outside the house, why are your kids in daycare? Just for the social aspect?" Celeste chuckled at the bluntness. "What, are you moonlighting as a social worker now? They're with Mrs. Jameson part-time so I can run my graphic design business. I work from home." She explained that she used the daycare hours for work, then shifted into full-time parenting once the kids were back. The schedule gave her the balance she needed, especially since Tristan seemed to prefer her staying in, maybe afraid she'd cross paths with someone like him. Scott was struck by her honesty, and her logic was sound. She wasn't being neglectful, just strategic. Then she pivoted. "So why did you really call? Do you actually have proof?" Scott laid everything out, his suspicions, the bits he overheard, and how the puzzle pieces fit together. Celeste listened quietly, her face unreadable. When he was done, she gave a slight nod. "Honestly, I'm not surprised," she said. "I've had my doubts for a while, especially after the twins were born. 2 years ago, I almost left. I caught him, no question. But I had no income, and the kids weren't old enough for daycare." She said Tristan had always been an absent father. Without solid proof, her hands were tied. Her words carried the heaviness of someone who had endured years of subtle betrayals. She wasn't expecting a peaceful split. In fact, the reason she built her business was to prepare for the day she might have to walk away. When Scott mentioned his recent clinic visit, she told him she'd done the same back when she first grew suspicious. She agreed it was probably time to get tested again. Scott admitted he hadn't only called out of concern for her health, he also might need her testimony. If Danica contested the divorce, he'd need someone to verify Tristan's movements during work hours. It would make Celeste part of the legal record. She didn't seem shaken. Her children were too young to grasp any of it, and she had no interest in preserving appearances. She even made a bitter joke about Tristan's recklessness, said it wouldn't shock her if one day someone's spouse finally snapped. The way he lived, it was only a matter of time before everything blew up. Scott left the meeting with a newfound respect for her, her composure, her resolve, her clarity in the face of chaos. Celeste carried herself with a composed resilience, clearly intent on protecting her children amid the turmoil Tristan brought into their lives. Her demeanor was practical and composed, exuding a sort of inner steel that left Scott with an odd sense of déjà vu. Conversation soon drifted toward Tristan's personality. Celeste didn't sugarcoat her thoughts. She portrayed him as a cold, cunning manipulator who lacked any trace of empathy, someone who would casually ruin lives to gratify his own desires. According to her, Tristan had been preying on vulnerable women since high school, using his former reputation as the adored quarterback to mask his true nature. Though she yearned for a way out, Celeste admitted that pursuing a divorce was complicated by the absence of definitive proof. There was plenty of whispered speculation and circumstantial signs, but nothing strong enough to stand up in court. Her voice held a tired edge, weariness laced with frustration. At one point, she allowed herself a grim thought. How much simpler things might be if Tristan were no longer around, whether by accident, fate, or someone else's hand. She mentioned that Tristan's own deep-seated paranoia had led him to take out a hefty life insurance policy, including a double indemnity clause in case he died under violent circumstances. Strangely, this paranoia had translated into a rare moment of prudence, ensuring his family's financial safety in the event of his untimely death. As they prepared to leave, Celeste casually remarked that sometimes she found herself wishing a natural disaster, or perhaps a vengeful husband, would remove Tristan from the picture. In her view, life would be better without him, especially for their children. Scott quietly urged her to be cautious with such thoughts. Celeste paused, letting his words sink in. As they walked to her car, she glanced at him with a thoughtful expression. Then, recognition flickered in her eyes. She suddenly remembered who he was, back in high school, the tall, quiet boy who'd endured years of bullying, but had once bravely intervened on her behalf during a fraught moment at a school dance. Though her friends had quickly led her away, that moment of courage had stayed with her. Scott remembered it clearly, too. He had stepped in when she was cornered by a football player named Aaron, helping her escape the uncomfortable encounter. The consequences were brutal. Aaron and his friends retaliated, ganging up on Scott and beating him severely. Their athletic status shielded them from repercussions, while Scott ended up suspended for the rest of the semester. He told Celeste the incident had been a turning point, pushing him to enlist in the military before graduation, where he eventually found structure and a sense of direction. Celeste, curious, asked what became of Aaron. Scott revealed that not long after, Aaron was arrested on drug charges. The case had escalated to the federal level, and justice had finally caught up with him. An example, Scott said, of karma eventually doing its work. Celeste listened carefully, visibly affected by the story. As they parted ways, she leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek, a silent thank you for the courage he had shown all those years ago. Scott stood and watched her drive away, struck by the unpredictable nature of life. Returning to his office, he switched gears and turned his attention to work. He promptly terminated 2 employees whose performance had fallen short, ensuring their severance packages were handled legally and respectfully. Their files had been meticulously documented, leaving no room for legal backlash. As he completed the dismissals, Scott found a sense of clarity. Both personal and professional severances could offer a strange kind of relief. He then convened his department leaders, instructing them to begin identifying candidates for internal promotions. He stressed the importance of accountability, reminding them that they were closest to their teams and thus best positioned to recognize merit. Still, he made it clear, no promotion would proceed without his personal endorsement. Recommendations were to be submitted through a formal committee, and he warned the managers that they would be responsible for the performance of those they put forward. After the meeting, Scott made another deliberate move. He contacted HR and arranged for Lena to be transferred to a warehouse office in the suburbs, where she would fill the position of a retiring manager. When Lena entered his office, visibly tense, Scott was direct. He acknowledged her work ethic, but told her plainly that he could no longer trust her on a personal level. A boundary had been crossed, and it wasn't something he could overlook. He informed her of the new role, mentioning that it came with a small raise and potential for growth. Their exchange was brief. Lena apologized, but Scott remained unmoved. He was tired of apologies that came too late to matter. Before the reassignment was finalized, he ensured her new supervisor had been briefed and was ready to support her. As far as Scott knew, that manager had no idea of the real reasons behind the transfer. Scott also made sure to highlight her accomplishments in her file, maintaining her professional reputation even as he disengaged emotionally. That same Monday evening, he met with a lawyer who offered appointments outside of regular hours. By the next day, the divorce paperwork had been filed. The attorney assured him that things could proceed quickly, so long as Danica didn't contest it. Scott was confident she wouldn't. A few weeks later, he hired movers to pack and transport her things. Most of what she took were personal items she had accumulated over the years. Scott chose not to be home during the move, wanting to avoid the emotional strain of watching her leave. It wasn't painless, but he stayed focused on what came next. Not long after, Celeste called out of the blue, just checking in to see how he was holding up. He updated her on Danica's departure, Lena's transfer, and the progress of the divorce. Celeste remarked on how composed he seemed, clearly impressed by the calculated way he had managed everything. Scott explained that he dealt with difficult situations the same way he handled work, by treating them like a checklist, one item at a time. She teased that with both Lena and Danica out of the picture and the divorce nearly done, he was close to clearing his list. Scott chuckled and replied that there were still a few loose ends left to take care of. When she asked whether she figured into his long-term plans, Scott jokingly sifted through a stack of papers, feigning a search for her name. She laughed at his deadpan performance, commenting that being added late was still preferable to being forgotten. True to his methodical habits, Scott kept pressing forward with his responsibilities. Eschewing digital tools, he stuck to his analog system, a small, unassuming notepad, where he ticked off items one by one, each check a deliberate act. 2 independent appraisers evaluated the property, with their reports sent to both Danica and her legal counsel. After both sides settled on a value between the 2 assessments, Scott secured a second mortgage to buy out Danica's share. He mailed her a cashier's check for the agreed amount. Next, he carefully took apart their bed frame, inspecting each piece for serial numbers or manufacturer marks. Anything identifiable was either removed or sanded off before he stored the frame in his garage. The mattress and box spring received the same careful treatment. He was committed to eliminating any physical remnants of the past. Once the court finalized its ruling on temporary alimony, Scott calculated the total due from their date of separation and mailed another cashier's check to cover it in full. To avoid future hassle, he set up recurring bank transfers, ensuring Danica's alimony would go directly into her savings account. Each task he completed brought him closer to emotional and logistical closure, incremental steps toward reclaiming his life after betrayal. Every note scratched into his notebook was more than a task. It was an act of self-restoration. Eventually, he reached out to Celeste to share his progress. With a smirk, he informed her that she now ranked number 43 on his now infamous to-do list, a playful gesture hinting at her growing significance in his life. He spoke candidly about tying up financial matters with Danica and ensuring all legal ends were tied. Celeste inquired about how Danica was coping, and Scott admitted he wasn't sure. Aside from a single tense meeting at their lawyer's office, there had been little to no contact. When she asked if he felt any lingering doubt or remorse, he took a moment to consider. While he did grieve the years, 6 in total, he'd devoted to a failed marriage, he had come to terms with the fact that trust, once broken, was irreparable. Though some feelings for Danica remained, he knew their chapter was closed. Celeste sympathized, admitting she envied how deeply he had once been able to trust. It had been so long since she'd felt that kind of certainty with Tristan, she could barely remember what it felt like. Their chat faded into a thoughtful silence before they parted ways, promising to stay in touch. 2 months later, Scott and Celeste met again, this time for a walk through a neighborhood park. They strolled side by side, reminiscing about their high school years. Scott confessed to having a few crushes back then, and Celeste teased him for being so oblivious that he likely missed signals from girls who liked him. When he asked if she would have dated him in those days, she laughed and said probably not until she realized how shallow the so-called popular kids actually were. But after he defended her at a school dance, her opinion of him shifted. She remembered searching for him afterward, though she hadn't known his name to ask around. As they walked, Celeste remarked on how much Scott's appearance had changed. He explained he'd been focusing on his health, shedding weight and regaining the strength he had during his military service. She teased him for being almost too fit, joking that a little softness was preferable when it came to cuddling. Their banter was light and affectionate, and as they said their goodbyes, Celeste surprised him with a gentle kiss. Scott had considered kissing her but had hesitated, afraid of what it might unleash. Her kiss wasn't impulsive, it felt deliberate, like a quiet offering. In the weeks that followed, With his divorce nearing its conclusion, Scott called Celeste one night to check in. He asked if Tristan was around, and she said he was out of town, likely preoccupied with someone new. Scott suggested dinner, but she declined, saying it wasn't the right time. However, she did say she'd be open to meeting in a few weeks and encouraged him to call again. When he did, he offered to cover the cost of a babysitter, aware of her responsibilities. Touched by the thought, Celeste mentioned that her neighbor, Mrs. Jameson, had offered to keep an eye on the twins overnight if needed. Though she wasn't planning to take her up on it, Celeste said she was genuinely looking forward to seeing Scott. She added with a grin that Mrs. Jameson suspected she had a mystery boyfriend, based on her recent boost in mood. Celeste clarified that her neighbor was merely speculating, but she appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. Over dinner, Celeste turned the tables and asked Scott whether he'd been feeling any happier. He said he wasn't entirely sure, but admitted that their talks had brought him a certain calm. When she asked where she now ranked on his list, he smiled and replied, "Number 9. A sweet acknowledgement of how much she now mattered to him. Later, back at her place, the conversation deepened when Scott asked about her children. Celeste noticed the sincerity behind his question and asked what had prompted his interest. Scott opened up, revealing that he had always wanted kids, but Danica had been firmly opposed. She believed that a child-free life suited them better, that parenting would only complicate things. Over time, he began to suspect she saw children not as a joy, but as a burden. His voice carried the weight of a long, quiet longing, a deep desire to be a father and experience the everyday magic of raising a child. Their dialogue grew more reflective as they both considered how their past choices had shaped where they were now. Scott eventually turned his gaze to the window, drifting into thought. Celeste softly broke the silence, referencing a conversation he'd once had with Danica. Despite all the years they'd spent together, Danica had never changed her mind. Eventually, Scott had given up broaching the subject, and deep down, he had doubts about whether she would have been the kind of mother he had hoped for anyway. Celeste gently redirected the dialogue to her own experience, subtly positioning it in contrast. Living with Tristan, she admitted, had never been the carefree adventure it might have seemed from the outside. The truth had depended too much on the nature of one's partner. Her tone hardened slightly as she turned the question back to Scott. What had really brought him there? Was it just concern, or was there something deeper? Did he come because being near her stirred something in him? Caught slightly off guard but answering earnestly, Scott admitted he was drawn to her. Still, he was quick to emphasize, he wasn't pursuing anything improper. What he hoped for was an honest friendship, and if possible, a bond with her children. Celeste hesitated, fully aware of the risks. There was always the danger that her kids might slip and mention Uncle Scott around Tristan, something she couldn't allow. For everyone's safety, she asked Scott to keep everything quiet. They could talk, perhaps take the occasional walk, but nothing more. Scott agreed without argument. He didn't want any more involvement with Tristan than was unavoidable. As he stood to go, Celeste stopped him. Turning slightly away, she lifted her shirt. At first, her skin looked pristine, pale and smooth. But then, the bruises revealed themselves, angry blotches of purple and blue trailing across her lower back and ribs. She told him that Tristan's abuse wasn't reckless or explosive. It was cold, calculated. He never broke skin, just left bruises that whispered volumes. But things had been worsening. Since Danica had ended things between them, Tristan's rage had taken on a more violent edge. Celeste admitted she had skipped a prior meeting with Scott because Tristan had blackened her eye. Her complexion, she said bitterly, betrayed her. The marks lasted too long, too hard to cover. Scott's expression broke for the first time. He stepped toward her and held her close. She turned into him, accepting his embrace briefly before pulling away and letting her shirt fall. In a low voice, He thanked her for trusting him with something so painful. They parted soon after, but not before she kissed him again. That second kiss settled something in Scott. He knew he had to act. His divorce proceeded quietly, citing the usual irreconcilable differences. Danica had requested a final meeting to apologize, but it meant nothing to him. 2 weeks later, he was free. And then, all his attention shifted to Tristan. At a rundown strip mall outside of town, Scott found a flyer pinned to a bulletin board. Someone was selling a beat-up pickup truck and some furniture ahead of an international move. The truck was old, dented, and rusted, but it ran well. Perfect for what Scott envisioned. He bought it in cash, took the title, and later that night burned it in his fireplace. The following morning, he drove the truck deep into a wooded park area and caked it in mud to make it look like it had seen heavy off-road use. Satisfied, he moved on to the next phase. He traveled far into the countryside, to a stretch of land he vaguely recalled from childhood hunting trips with his father. Barren, forgotten terrain, dotted with abandoned mining debris and industrial waste. It was as forsaken as he remembered. With grim satisfaction, he knew he'd found the right place. That night, under the cover of darkness, he returned. In the back of the truck lay dismantled pieces of a bed frame he'd taken from home. He scavenged broken pallets and junk from the surrounding area and built a crude platform, reconstructing the bed on top of it. He had rehearsed it over and over in his garage until he could do it with his eyes closed. Now, with everything in place, he soaked the structure in gasoline, struck a kitchen match, and watched the fire roar to life. It was more than just flames. It was ritual, a kind of cleansing, a farewell to everything that had led to this moment. He stood by as it burned, then turned his back and walked away. Tristan hadn't gone quietly. He had still been alive when the fire was lit. Scott had calculated every blow, ensuring he stayed conscious throughout. Experience had taught him that quick acts dull the meaning. He wanted Tristan alert for every agonizing second. This wasn't about revenge on a single man. Tristan symbolized every betrayal, every wound, every broken promise. He had shattered Scott's marriage, abused Celeste, and left scars across too many lives. Scott had no doubt this had to end. Tristan's screams tore through the darkness for 11 minutes. Once silence returned, Scott retrieved Tristan's phone. He used it to call in an anonymous tip to the sheriff's office, wiped the device clean, and tossed it into the fire. The job was done. He didn't feel guilt. In combat, he had done far worse to men who hadn't deserved it. Tristan had. Scott drove south in the battered truck, avoiding main roads. Hours later, he pulled into a run-down shopping center with a 24-hour diner. He fueled up at the nearby Citgo, parked the vehicle in plain sight, and left the key in the ignition. As he walked past a group of young men lingering outside the diner, he intentionally brushed shoulders with one of them. The guy looked up, startled, but Scott's towering, unshaken demeanor made them think twice. He kept walking. Once he polished off the last bite of pie and drained his coffee, he exited the diner to find what he had expected all along. The truck was gone. With no other option, he walked a mile to the bus terminal, boarded the next ride heading home, and slept soundly the entire way. In the days that followed, officials confirmed what he already knew. Tristan was dead. The unusual circumstances surrounding his demise captured public interest quickly, prompting law enforcement to dig deeper into his life. That search led them straight to Danica, tracing back to the infamous high school reunion. Before long, investigators assembled a comprehensive profile on Tristan, a trail that inevitably led them to Scott. Although parts of Scott's military file were redacted, what remained hinted strongly at a past in elite operations, a detail that only intensified the scrutiny. Detective Sergeant Bishop eventually called Scott in for questioning. His primary concern? Why the CEO of a successful business had made an uncharacteristic personal visit to a client on the very same day Tristan's body was discovered. Scott explained that the client was an old friend, once his superior in the military, who had asked for his direct involvement. When Bishop steered the conversation toward Scott's service record, particularly his Silver Star commendation, Scott dismissed it, insisting that it held no relevance to the matter at hand. But Bishop wasn't about to let it slide. He referenced an operation where Scott had reportedly taken out 43 enemy fighters to extract his injured team. Scott's demeanor never faltered. He answered coolly, his voice calm and collected. The detective then changed tack and asked about a new bed Scott had recently purchased, curious about what became of the old one. Scott replied that he had donated it to Goodwill and even produced a donation receipt. Goodwill confirmed the donation, but after the bed was sold for cash, the paper trail vanished, offering no new leads. With other suspects emerging, investigators were forced to pivot. Meanwhile, Scott kept a low profile, maintaining his routine. 3 months after Tristan's memorial, and just a week after Scott signed his divorce papers, Celeste reached out. Her timing didn't catch him off guard. Their earlier conversations had carried an undercurrent, subtle hints that she might know more than she had ever said aloud. Scott wasn't sure what her end goal was. Did she intend to expose him? Leverage what she knew? He understood the difference between wishing someone dead and watching that wish become reality. When they finally spoke, Celeste laid her cards on the table. It was a form of blackmail, but not in the traditional sense. She wasn't asking for hush money or secrets. All she wanted was for him to come over for a home-cooked dinner. Scott couldn't help but chuckle. Celeste Blake, now a widow, was neither innocent nor easily intimidated. She gave off the impression that she fully grasped the events that had unfolded, and still wanted him around. Her house was buzzing with noise and warmth as her children adjusted quickly to the presence of Uncle Scott. At first, they were cautious. His tall, unfamiliar figure was overwhelming. They didn't quite understand why their father was no longer there. Celeste's soft explanation that he had gone to heaven didn't satisfy their confusion. Noticing that his height seemed to unsettle them, Scott crouched to their level. Caleb and Nina, mirror images of their mother, were thrilled to suddenly look down on the towering adult. In no time, they were giggling, climbing all over him, their reservations evaporating into joyful shrieks. By the time Scott stood again, they were completely comfortable. Later, after dinner, Scott joined Celeste in dropping the kids off at Mrs. Jameson's for the night. On the drive back, he joked about whether he'd be staying over, too. Celeste shot him a playful look and warned him that any misbehavior would earn him a one-way trip back to his car and a permanent ban. Once home, she admitted with a nervous smile that she felt slightly on edge. She'd heard whispers that the person behind Tristan's death might be nearby. Scott raised an eyebrow, asking where she'd heard such rumors. "From the voices in my head," she said with a grin. They both laughed, but beneath the humor, the heaviness of Tristan's absence lingered. Months later, Celeste brought up a different topic, one that had been quietly brewing. When was Scott planning to propose? Though she said it with a light touch, her question hung in the air with significance. Scott's expression grew serious. He voiced concern that their relationship might draw attention from the authorities. Celeste dismissed it without hesitation. There was no evidence linking him to Tristan's death, nor would there ever be. They had never discussed it outright, but her quiet understanding of the truth was unmistakable. Scott paused, asking whether she could truly feel safe with him, or if some part of her would always be wary. Celeste reached out, gently holding his face, her eyes locking with his. She said she trusted him without reservation, believed in his principles, and never feared him, not for a moment. That trust extended to her children as well, whom she believed would always feel safe around him. Deeply moved, Scott began to raise concerns about how Tristan had once betrayed her trust. But she stopped him. He had already taken a huge risk by opening up to her, possibly even putting his freedom on the line. That meant more than any words ever could. Then, with a grin, she pressed the issue again, this time demanding a proper proposal. Caught in the moment, Scott dropped to one knee. She burst out laughing, telling him it didn't count without a ring. He dramatically checked his pockets before producing one. The delicate band looked comically small in his broad hand. Celeste eyed it suspiciously, teasing that it might be a recycled ring from Danica. Scott swore it was new, saying he picked it out instead of buying tomatoes at a roadside market. That sealed it. Celeste squealed and leapt into his arms, her joy echoing through the room. Scott held her tightly, overwhelmed by how far they'd come. When she jokingly suggested that this might be his way of thanking her for saving her from Alistair, she gave him a wink, hinting that she had her own ideas about repayment. As expected, their marriage brought back long-buried memories and reignited old tensions. The renewed public interest prompted the authorities to re-examine Tristan's case, sifting through familiar evidence once again. But the renewed investigation proved short-lived. The case was shelved once more, this time with an air of finality. Before stepping away for good, Detective Sergeant Bishop paid Scott a final visit, carrying a truth he'd long kept to himself. They sat quietly on Scott's back patio when Bishop finally shared the burden he'd been holding. Tristan, he revealed, had once targeted his daughter-in-law, Rachel. She and Bishop's son, Caleb, had attended school with Scott and Celeste, a stark reminder of Tristan's long history of exploitation. Bishop spoke candidly of the torment Rachel had endured. Even being married to a police officer hadn't protected her. During a vulnerable period in her life, Tristan manipulated her into a relationship she never wanted, then maintained control over her using compromising photos. She hadn't been his only victim. Others had suffered too, deepening her pain. As Bishop spoke, his voice trembled, torn between sorrow and simmering rage. He described how his family had struggled through counseling and therapy, trying to rebuild in the aftermath. Scott listened without interrupting, a new respect for the detective settling in. It became undeniably clear Tristan hadn't only damaged Scott's life, he had devastated countless others. When their conversation came to an end, Scott sat in quiet thought, aware of how far he and Celeste had come, and of the strength they'd still need going forward. Across from him, Walter remained still, fists clenched, silent and tense. He didn't speak for a while. Then, summoning his strength, he finally began. One night, Caleb had returned home late from work to find Rachel collapsed in the bathroom. She had slit her wrists. It happened after one of the times Tristan had come back into their lives. Walter's voice cracked, but he kept going. She survived the suicide attempt, thanks to a timely transfusion. But emotionally, it was as if something inside her had shut down. No one understood the depth of her suffering until an anonymous source came forward. Once Tristan's body turned up, investigators dug deeper. Rachel, however, remained silent. Walter lowered his head, releasing a slow, heavy breath. Tristan had been reckless with his words, he said bitterly. When the pressure was turned on his associates, the truth started spilling out. Scott listened, unmoving, as Walter laid everything bare. When Caleb finally told Rachel that Tristan was dead, something inside her changed. She began to recover, slowly but noticeably. It was the first real sign of healing in a long time. Just days ago, Caleb had been sent on assignment, a move meant to keep him at a distance while the remaining perpetrators were arrested. Walter had no doubt that, had Caleb been aware, he would have taken matters into his own hands. They couldn't risk that. For a fleeting moment, Walter's face darkened with old anger, but it quickly shifted to grim resolve. The two men they arrested would be facing an overwhelming list of charges. The evidence against them was rock solid. They wouldn't be walking free anytime soon. And as for Rachel, she was finally improving. Her doctors were optimistic she might be able to return home in the near future. Scott gave a quiet nod, his voice low and sincere. That's really good to hear, Walter. They both deserve some peace. Walter hesitated for a moment before continuing, his tone softer now. There's something more, he said. Caleb wants to talk to you. But he's ashamed. Back in high school, he was one of the boys who attacked you. The incident that got you suspended. He's been carrying that guilt with him, especially now, after everything you've done. Scott let a small smile cross his face. That's all in the past, he replied. What matters is who he is today. If he's ready, I'd be happy to talk. And I'd like to see Rachel when the time feels right. Walter rose, signaling that their conversation had come to an end, but paused before leaving. Just so you know, he said, the case is officially closed. As long as I have anything to say about it, it's not coming back. He extended his hand, and Scott took it without hesitation. Thank you, Walter, Scott said, his voice firm and calm. Walter gave a short, respectful nod. No, Scott, he answered. Thank you. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Scott alone in the stillness, surrounded by the quiet weight of all that had come to pass. This marks the end of our first story, but don't hit pause. An equally thrilling tale is coming up next. Here we go. My wife Diane has a slender build, pale complexion, pale blonde hair, a smattering of freckles, and eyes that are an icy, almost electric blue. During our college years, when we were still dating but not yet married, she cheated on me once. I decided to let it go and move forward. But earlier this year, I began noticing changes in her behavior, small things that uneasily echoed the way she acted back during that betrayal. Around the same time, our intimacy started to fade. My doubts about Diane's faithfulness started to solidify. The simplest way to gather evidence without confrontation was to make use of her phone's location services. I quietly enabled the Find My iPhone feature. Just 2 days after activating it while I was at work, I checked her whereabouts. Oddly enough, the app showed she was at our house. Given that she works as a realtor, she should have been out on appointments, not home in the middle of a Wednesday. I told my boss I needed to take an extended lunch break and drove straight home. Her car was parked in the driveway, the only one there. I told myself she might have just stopped by to grab something. But the moment I opened the front door, I sensed something was off. From upstairs, I could hear muffled voices, coming from our bedroom. I crept up the stairs, careful not to make a sound, and slid my phone into the narrow gap of the cracked open door to record what was happening inside. Watching the screen, I felt my chest tighten. Diane was in bed with 2 of our neighbors, John and Kevin. Both of them were married men with young kids. The bed was draped in a heavy rubber sheet, something I'd never seen in our home before. It was obvious that it wasn't spontaneous. Everything was planned in advance. I was stunned. I had no idea that she had such sexual preferences. Once I tried to bring more assertiveness into our intimate life, but she completely rejected it, refrained from intimate relations for a month, telling me that she did not like it. But watching her now, I realized how much she was hiding from me. I made a mental note. The footage I had was more than enough. I turned away from the door without a word, walked back downstairs, and poured myself a drink in the kitchen. I stood silently, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The betrayal hit me in full. My wife was cheating, and I no longer wanted to share my life with her. I said it out loud, as if saying it would make it more real. I have to figure out what to do next. Still gripping the drink, I made a decision. That's exactly what I'm going to do, I whispered. I opened the fridge, moved all but 1 bottle of wine into a cabinet, then found 2 sleeping pills in Diane's handbag. I crushed them and stirred the powder into the remaining wine bottle before sliding it back into the fridge. After that, I grabbed my laptop and took a seat at the dining table. Upstairs, the sounds hadn't stopped. I logged into my online accounts and removed Diane from both my medical proxy and life insurance policy. Then I began untangling our joint finances and downloaded the divorce forms relevant to our state. I began filling them out without delay. Eventually, I heard the water start running. It sounded like they were using the shower. It stayed on for what felt like forever, maybe over an hour. The staircase leads right down near the front door, so I had a clear view from where I sat. When Diane finally came down with John and Kevin in tow, I didn't hesitate. "You're all caught," I said flatly. "I've already sent the video to your wives. Good luck cleaning up the mess." They stopped mid-step on the landing, clearly stunned. John spoke first, his tone aggressive. "What the hell did you do?" He was taller than me and had maybe 20 pounds on me. Not that it mattered. Most of it was flab. "I just destroyed your marriage the same way you helped destroy mine," I replied, calm as ice. "I swear to God I'll hurt you," he growled, stepping forward. Before he could make a move, I rose and uncovered 2 kitchen knives I had hidden beneath a napkin. One in each hand, I faced them, my gaze fixed on John. "Kevin, you in on this too?" I asked. Kevin's face went pale. "No, man, I'm out. I don't want any part of this." "Good. Door's over there." I pointed with the knife in my left hand, not breaking eye contact with John. Kevin didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted out the front door. "Well, there goes your backup," I said to John. "Now it's just the 2 of us." I stepped forward slightly. "Never liked you, John. Always thought you were a fake tough guy hiding behind forced charm." He sneered. "You hate me because I see through your act." His face twisted with rage. "I'll take that knife and show you what real pain feels like." I tilted one of the knives toward him. "Try it. The moment you go for this one, I'll shove the other 8 inches straight into your stomach. Or your eye. Depends on how quick you move." He stood his ground, breathing heavily, hate radiating from his eyes. He didn't speak. "What's wrong?" I taunted. "Always acting like you're ready for a fight. Here's your chance." I suddenly lunged forward, driving the blade toward his face in a feint. He jerked back, nearly stumbling, narrowly avoiding a real injury. John's face fell the moment it registered. I wasn't bluffing. After nearly losing an eye, the realization hit him hard. The fear in his eyes, and the spreading wet patch on his pants, said more than words ever could. He stood there shaking, utterly defeated. I let the silence stretch, then spoke in a dry, almost amused voice. "You're leaking on my floor, John. Get out. Pretend this place never existed." He didn't need convincing. With a frantic screech, he turned and bolted through the front door like a panicked cartoon character. I watched him go without a word. Then, under my breath, I said, "What a shame. I truly can't stand that man." A small part of me had wanted to watch him squirm longer. Diane stood nearby, motionless, pale as death. I gently closed the door and turned back to her, an unsettling calm in my voice. "Now then, sweetheart, let's talk a bit. Careful where you step. Wouldn't want you slipping on what's left of your knight in shining armor." I returned to my place at the dining table, tucking the knives beneath a napkin like they'd never left. I motioned for Diane to sit. She hesitated, then quickly obeyed, her hands shaking. Her voice was barely audible when she said, "I'm sorry." I flipped casually through a stack of documents. "Yes," I replied, not looking up. "You are. You're a sorry excuse for a person." I cut her off before the apologies could gain momentum. I pushed a few pages toward her. "These are the divorce papers, already filled out. It's a no-fault state, so we're splitting everything equally. The house is yours. I'll keep my retirement fund. I've already moved half of our checking and savings into a new account under my name. The credit cards are paid off and canceled. I'm aiming for a clean, fast break. This is the most generous offer you'll get. No spousal support." Her hands were still trembling, but her defiance returned like a slap. Absolutely not, she said. You earn way more than I do. I'm entitled to support, and the house stays with me. I leaned back, my voice now sharp and cold. Would you like a preview of what I've got ready to send your family, your friends, and every man who ever considers dating you? I held up my phone and froze the video at the right moment, her tangled up with both neighbors. Her eyes widened in horror. That's blackmail, she gasped. It's not my fault Kevin's and John's wives spread it after you sent it. Then maybe ask yourself what you did to make them hate you that much. I tapped the papers. Sign. This is me being merciful. Stall, and the video hits the internet. She skimmed the pages. The signature spots were highlighted. She scrawled her name with obvious reluctance. Great. I'll file them this afternoon. I'll be coming and going for the next few days to collect my things. I've already taken time off work. So do us both a favor and stay out of my path. My voice went flat. And I'll be watching what you touch. Don't test me. Whatever, she snapped. Have it your way. I headed to the courthouse with the documents. When I got back, pulling up in a rented van, Diane was stretched out on the couch, glass of wine in hand. She was wearing something absurd, like she was starring in a late-night commercial. Without a word, I activated my phone's camera. Might want to change, I told her. You're on video now. She grinned and struck a suggestive pose. You still love me, don't you? I didn't answer. Every insult I wanted to throw died on my lips. The silence cut deeper than anything I could say, and she knew it. You'll miss me, she said smugly. I just stared, face blank, like she was something I'd scraped off my shoe. Then I turned and headed upstairs to pack. She followed, sprawled out across the bed while I folded shirts and jeans. She tried every trick, sweet talk, guilt trips, nostalgia. I miss us, she said, almost purring. We could still fix this. I gave her nothing, no words, no eye contact. When my back was turned, she slid off the bed and wrapped herself around me from behind. Please, I'll do better. I promise. Her arms clung to me, but I didn't flinch. The only thing left inside me was disgust. Everything else had burned away. When it hit her that the charm offensive had failed, she stepped back with a scowl and stormed toward the door. Just before leaving, she spat out one final jab. Maybe if you'd been a real husband, I wouldn't have needed anyone else. I kept folding my clothes like she hadn't said a word. That silence, the total absence of reaction, infuriated her more than anything I'd ever done. She stomped away, shouting all the way down the stairs. If you had ever actually cared, none of this would have happened. If you'd treated me like I mattered, we wouldn't be here. Then, from the bottom of the steps, came her last cry of outrage. You'll never win me back unless you admit everything was your fault. I just shook my head, quietly. What a mess. As I loaded my things into the van, I took one last glance through the window. There she was, right back on the couch, robe on, wine refilled, TV blaring, as if none of it had ever happened. She behaved as if I were invisible. Almost an hour had passed when I walked through the hall carrying a box and noticed Diane napping on the sofa. My curiosity got the better of me, so I wandered into the kitchen to check the wine. Only a small amount remained. I returned to her side and gave her a light push. She didn't react. Leaning in close, I shouted her name directly into her ear. Still, she didn't budge. Smirking to myself, I whispered, nothing like a plan coming together. I slipped her wedding ring off her finger and slid it into my pocket. I switched her phone to airplane mode and stashed it in a drawer beneath the sink. Then I shut all the blinds in the house, draped a thick black blanket over the glass panels of the front door, and did the same to the windows and garage door. I even made sure the doorbell was silenced. The rest of the evening was spent meticulously packing up everything worth taking, her expensive jewelry, her high-end kitchenware, and anything else that could fetch value. I focused on the most important items in case I had to bail early. Diane's sleeping pills normally knocked her out for a solid 8 hours, with a groggy haze lingering after that. In her sedated state, waking her was impossible. Just to be certain, I crushed another pill and carefully sprinkled the powder into her open mouth. A splash of wine helped her swallow, though she gave a small cough. I kept up this sedation on a strict 6-hour cycle. By the next morning at 8 a.m., I had eaten breakfast and was already out in the yard. I locked the side gate with a padlock and carried her, still unresponsive, to a lawn chair. I tied a rope between 2 trees and hung large beach towels from it, not to dry them, but to block the view from neighboring houses. To any casual observer, it looked like typical backyard clutter. In reality, it was a visual barrier hiding Diane's unconscious body from sight. The day settled into a rhythm of packing the van, running loads to a storage unit, and transferring my things to a temporary motel room. Every 6 hours, she got another dose. About once every hour, I shifted her chair to keep her in full sunlight, wouldn't want uneven tanning. Around noon, a loud banging echoed from the front door. I peeked through the blinds and spotted Kevin's wife, along with John's. They were screaming, wild with anger. "Show yourself, you filthy cheater! I'll drag you out if I have to. You can't hide forever, you lying snake!" Luckily, I had rented a compact van that fit neatly into the garage. I watched them try the side gate, but they didn't climb over. With the windows covered and no lights visible, the house probably looked deserted. After a few heated minutes, they stomped off. By nightfall, Diane's skin was a deep, painful red. Once the sun had set, I brought her inside and laid her on the couch beneath the ceiling fan to cool her down. I reset my alarm for 6-hour intervals to keep the sedative routine going. That Friday morning, around 9 a.m., I moved her back into the yard. Unexpectedly, by 1 p.m., the pain managed to pull her from her drugged sleep. She staggered inside through the back door, disoriented. "Diane, what happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "You're scorched. Come here, drink this and lie down." I settled her on the couch and handed her a glass of water, already dosed with another crushed pill. Once she drifted back into unconsciousness, I carried her outside again. Then I poured out the rest of the wine, scrubbed the inside of the wine bottle, and cleaned the glass she had used. After sunset, I brought her back indoors. Her skin radiated heat, and blisters were beginning to rise. The weather had been brutally sunny for 2 days straight. This time, I let the medication wear off on its own. I removed all the window coverings, opened the blinds, unlocked the side gate, and took down the rope and towels in the yard. At 8 p.m., I gently poked her sunburned stomach. Nothing. An hour later, I tried again, and this time she jolted upright, screaming, "Don't touch me!" "Diane, we need to get you to a hospital," I said, acting alarmed. "You must have collapsed in the sun. You're seriously burned." "Where am I? Everything hurts," she muttered, her words slurred with confusion. "Diane, I'm serious. You need help. Your face is so swollen I can barely recognize you." She managed to get into her robe, but couldn't walk. Her feet were too blistered and raw to bear weight. I carried her to the car. At the ER, once she was admitted, a doctor came over to speak with me. "How long was she outside in the sun?" he asked. "I don't really know," I said. "We've been separated for a little while now. I only ended up back at the house because I forgot a few things. Otherwise, I never would have seen her lying unconscious on the couch. Judging by the scene, she'd been drinking and fallen asleep in the sun for hours." "Will she pull through?" I asked. "Most likely," came the reply, "but the full extent of the damage won't be clear until the swelling eases." "How bad are we talking?" I pressed. The doctor explained that the entire front of her body had sustained second-degree burns, possibly worse in some areas. They suspected pockets of third-degree burns, and she was being treated for sun poisoning. They had her on IV fluids to manage the fever and reduce inflammation. "We'll update you as we learn more." Once the doctor left, I walked into Diane's hospital room. Her body was wrapped in layers of bandages, all down the front. A thick pad covered her lower torso. I had made sure her legs were apart and aligned toward the sunlight. A nurse, probably in her 20s, came over with a clipboard. "Are you her spouse?" she asked. "Used to be," I said. "We're divorced." "Do you know her insurance provider?" "No," I said without emotion. I had removed her from my plan some time ago. Far as I knew, she wasn't covered anywhere else. I told the nurse she'd need to wait until Diane came to. Then I turned around and walked out of the hospital without another word. The next morning, while finishing up my packing, a pair of officers showed up at the house. One asked me questions, while the other poked around the first floor and the backyard, paying particular attention to the kitchen and the laundry area. "We're following up on your wife's recent hospitalization due to severe sunburn," the first officer said. "You mean Diane? We're in the middle of finalizing our divorce," I clarified. "Got it. When was the last time you saw her before the burns?" "That would have been Thursday evening. I dropped in to pick up a few of my things. She was lounging on the couch at the time." "Did it seem like she had been out tanning that day?" "Yes," I replied. "Her skin was a consistent shade of red." "Approximately what time was that?" "Sometime around 8 p.m. "How could you tell she had been tanning?" "She wasn't wearing clothes," I said. "On Wednesday, I caught her in bed with both of our neighbors. After that, she tried to stop me from following through with the divorce." "I understand. When did you see her again?" "Friday morning. I came to collect the rest of my stuff." "Was she sunbathing then?" "She walked in after seeing me inside. She was naked, clearly drunk, and full of self-pity. She made another attempt to talk me out of it. When I said no, she got furious. I took what I came for and left. As I walked out, she was back outside in the sun, bottle of wine in hand." "Is she a heavy drinker?" "She'll usually sip a couple of glasses while tanning, but that night I found 3 empty wine bottles in the kitchen. She doesn't usually drink that much unless she has company. But she tends to drink more when she's spiraling emotionally, and she was definitely a wreck over the divorce." "Who does she typically tan with?" "Her 2 closest friends," I said, though I doubt they're talking to her now. "Why's that?" "Because the 2 guys I caught her with, they're married to those same women." "Right. Well, your wife has accused you of drugging her and deliberately leaving her exposed to the sun. She's trying to pin this on me? I've warned her more times than I can count. Never mix alcohol with those damn sleep meds." "So she uses sleeping pills?" "Yeah, they're prescribed, but she abuses them. Whenever she's upset, in pain, or wants to knock herself out, she pops them like candy. She actually enjoys the high from mixing them with booze." "Okay, that's all for now." As they turned to leave, I gave them a puzzled look. Felt like the smartest reaction. And honestly, I was curious what was going through their minds. Being straight with law enforcement is usually the safest approach. After they left, I swapped out the small moving truck for a bigger one. I'd need the extra room for tools and furniture. By Monday, I had the house listed online, just in case I needed leverage. 2 days later, Diane rang me. "Hey, would you mind bringing me some clothes?" "Nope," I replied. "Ask John or Kevin for a favor." "Please, I really need your help. Can't you find a little bit of forgiveness somewhere in your heart?" "You already got that little bit," I said. "I carried you into the car and got you to the ER. That's more than enough. Don't call me again." I ended the call. By the time Diane got out of the hospital, the house was bare, except for a few of her oldest outfits, some makeup, our shared mattress, and the rubber sheet. At the bottom of the laundry hamper, I stumbled upon the rubber sheet, sealed tightly inside a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. I had stripped the bed completely, no sheets, no comforter, not even a pillowcase, leaving only that same foul-smelling rubber sheet in place. Before heading out, I switched off the air conditioning, so by the time she returned, the house must have felt like a furnace, a cruel welcome for my sun-scorched wife. I'd already rented a storage locker to safeguard the things I planned to keep. Everything else, items I no longer cared for, or those I knew Diane would try to claim in the divorce, was either sold off to thrift stores or tossed in the trash. I shredded our wedding album, deleted every trace of it online, and set fire to her wedding gown. Once we both lawyered up, I made sure every exchange went through my attorney. Diane spammed my phone and email with message after message, mostly apologies, though some turned venomous once she saw how empty the house was after her hospital release. She tried to walk back the divorce papers she had already signed. Her desperation was obvious. She couldn't risk being exposed to sunlight anymore. Even indirect warmth through clothing triggered her pain. She had no choice but to quit real estate. Honestly, who wants a real estate agent who has to hide from the sun like a vampire? She claimed the divorce was coerced and accused me of robbing her blind. She even went so far as to ask for spousal support. Thankfully, the property sold before the ink dried on the final paperwork. I told her I'd block the sale and freeze the proceeds unless she agreed to stop fighting the settlement. That did the trick. She was clearly strapped for cash. About a month after everything was finalized, well after sunset, I heard a loud knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw her. Diane, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken since I dropped her at the hospital. She looked unsteady, possibly drunk. I'd been expecting this visit eventually. When I opened the door, she pushed past me without hesitation. "What are you doing here, Diane?" I asked. "I need a drink," she said. I told her there was wine chilling in the fridge. Without asking, she grabbed the bottle, took a long swig straight from it, then poured the rest into a glass. Wine in hand, she collapsed onto my sofa. I offered a sarcastic welcome. "By all means, make yourself comfortable." She matched my tone with a smirk. "Don't mind if I do." She peeled off her light jacket and reclined again. Underneath, she wore a skimpy crop top, not far from a bikini. The same smug, self-satisfied look I remembered so well clung to her face. I sat across from her, meeting her eyes with a cool, unreadable stare. Her face bore the worst of it: fresh wrinkles, uneven pigmentation, and patches of peeling, blistered skin in shades of red, gray, and white. She had no makeup on, probably following a doctor's warning against infection. But her nose had changed the most, once elegant and petite, now disfigured and bumpy. She would have been better off keeping the jacket on. Her body looked even worse, riddled with blotches, burns, and discoloration. Diane had always taken pride in her appearance, flaunting her looks to manipulate and charm. I knew she was fully aware of how far she'd fallen. I suspected this visit was less about wine and more about testing whether I still saw her the way I once did, if some part of me still found her attractive. But I didn't hide my disinterest. That smug confidence faded quickly. Her posture sagged. She looked shaken. What had she expected? This was a woman who weaponized her beauty, someone who could get her way with a well-timed smile or the sway of her hips. But now, the sun had done what years never could, transformed her from desirable to invisible in a single stroke. She didn't gradually fade from attention. She became obsolete overnight, at least to me. I asked again, "So what is it you actually want, Diane?" She gave a sweet, practiced smile. "Another chance. Love is built on trust." "I don't trust you," I replied bluntly. "You hoarded the best of yourself, gave it to others while keeping me in the dark. Whatever your reasons, your actions said I wasn't worth the effort." "I didn't change. I was still your wife," she said, grasping at straws. "That fire, that energy, you should have poured it into us, not wasted it elsewhere," I snapped. The look on her face told me I'd taken her off script. She had come rehearsed, but I'd thrown her lines into chaos. "Just tell me the real reason you're here." The smile vanished. "I need help with my medical bills. You had no right to take me off your insurance. The divorce wasn't even official yet." "That's exactly what a divorce means," I said. "Separate lives, separate finances, separate everything." Her eyes, weighed down by sagging lids, locked onto mine. "You did this to me. You owe me, and if you don't help, I'll go to the police." "They already looked into it. Months ago, I said. Nothing came of it. After all the court hearings, nobody's buying your story anymore. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I know it was you. What did you say? So getting drunk in the sun and passing out counts as a criminal offense now? I said, raising an eyebrow. That's a new one to me. She didn't hesitate to snap back. How can you say that? You loved me once. Correction, I said flatly. I did love you. Past tense. An awkward silence stretched between us until she finally spoke again, her voice small and trembling. I need help. The hospital bills are suffocating me. I've got no money left, and there are still treatments to go. Skin grafts, maybe more. Things got complicated. Her eyes locked on mine, wet, desperate, hollow. I still love you, and I know you loved me once. Maybe we can find our way back. She looked like she wanted to cry, but her eyes stayed dry. Probably the sunburn had destroyed whatever was left of her tear ducts. Why not reach out to Kevin or John? I asked. You were tight with them too. Her expression contorted, shame, resentment, and something more. They're both broke and divorced. They've completely cut me off. She paused, then added, right after we ended things, John came to my hotel. Thought maybe we could spark something again. Thought it might make him feel like a man. It didn't. His shame was still plain as day. I reminded him of how pathetic he looked in your presence. He stormed out, furious, yelling I was a washed-up mess. He always hated you, couldn't stand the way you exposed him. His ego never recovered. His wife had watched that clip you sent, the one where he broke down. She was waiting when he walked through the door. She knew it came from you. She took pictures of him at his lowest. Later I started seeing his wife, more than once. She wanted to know why he caved like that. I told her the truth. Ever since, she made sure to drop my name into every conversation with him. And with her permission, I sent John a photo every week. Never anything obvious, nothing he could prove, just enough for him to know what was happening. That stopped a few weeks ago, but I still have the photos. Kevin? I didn't bother. There was nothing left to destroy. His family had already left. Diane told me once, drunk and full of regret, that while John chased after her, she went for Kevin. Said he was cute, younger, too easy to manipulate. I remember one barbecue at John's place. Diane flirted and Kevin practically lit up. After their first night together, Kevin tried to pull away, called it a mistake. But Diane and John ambushed him with pictures John had secretly snapped, blackmailed him into staying involved. Kevin quickly learned how ugly things get when cheating becomes a weapon. You scared John that badly? Diane asked, her eyes almost glowing at the memory. The chaos excited her. In that moment I saw a flicker in her eyes. Hope. Maybe she thought I did it all for her, to win her back. I held her gaze, cold and blank, until that flicker died out. Kevin's wife? She's merciless. Rips him apart to anyone who will listen, even in front of their kids. She shared that infamous video everywhere. His co-workers, his friends, even my own family saw it. Once I ran into Kevin at the store, just wanted to talk. The second he saw me, he collapsed to the floor, sobbing like a child. I walked out before the cops arrived. He's even worse off than John. Diane's face darkened, like the weight of everything she'd done finally hit her. She took a long pull from her wine glass, maybe hoping to drown the guilt. Why not offer them what worked before? I said. I can't, she whispered. I can't be with anyone like that anymore. Why not? Picked something up? No, she replied. It's the sunburn. That serious? I asked. You don't understand, she said through a grimace. The worst areas, they're always in pain. I have to keep them covered in gauze all the time. Even a breeze feels like knives. That's funny, I said. You never used to mind a little pain. But I doubt Kevin and John were in it for that. That's when she broke. The tears finally came, and she sobbed. It ruined me. The sunburn ruined me forever. I looked at her, confused. My most sensitive parts, she said, choking on the words. They burned as badly as the rest. When the skin came off, I lost everything. The doctors say sensation might come back. Someday. But right now, there's nothing. I can't feel. I can't enjoy anything. Her body shook with deeper cries, face buried in her palms. I let her cry, maybe thinking I'd reach over, comfort her, hold her hand. Instead, I picked up her wine glass and handed it back to her. She gulped it down, wiped her face, and managed a small, hopeful smile. Unreal. She really believed that a few tears, some scars, and a half-hearted smile could undo everything she'd done. That I'd sweep in and save her, emotionally, financially, the whole package. But I just smiled to myself. The free ride was over. I had flipped her world upside down. Now it was time to crush whatever illusions she had left and erase her from my life once and for all. When Diane caught the subtle lift at the corner of my mouth, her sobs abruptly stopped, replaced by the gentlest smile she could summon. I stepped closer, took her arm with care, and helped her rise before guiding her toward the front door. As we arrived at the threshold, she hesitated. Turning toward me, she clung to me tightly, her body trembling. Her eyes met mine with a quiet desperation as she whispered, "Do you still love me?" I didn't look away. Her words hovered, unspoken, between us. After a long moment, I began to ease the door shut and answered, "Why would I?" The woman I once adored had vanished long ago. With nothing left in her but shadows and silence, I closed the door, gently, deliberately, and left her standing there, alone on the other side. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.